This is an address that was delivered by Dr. Charles Armand to the Greater Baltimore Optometric Society on March 21, 1995.
"10 months ago, Insight was just an idea. Today, it's a growing network of 50 ODs, most of whom are owners in the company. Our goal is to reach every optometrist in Maryland and beyond with the message that the best way for this profession to interface with PRK is by ODs taking leadership and ownership roles. And we'd like to spend the next few minutes talking about why. Patients in over 40 countries are electing to have this procedure done. The clinical outcomes are excellent. More than 80% of the patients obtain 20/20 vision. More than 90% of the patients obtain 20/40 vision. Within the next few months, PRK will be available in the United States, and when it gets here, it's going to revolutionize refractive eye care. This is not going to be like RK. We're not going to be able to scare our patients out of having it done or hope that it will go away. PRK is going to create a paradigm change in the treatment of refractive disorders that will significantly affect every one of us. And so we need to take a realistic, pragmatic look at how PRK will influence the way we practice. This marketplace promises to be every bit as competitive as the marketplace for contact lenses and glasses, and we need to be prepared to compete in it. If we're going to compete and win, we need to organize ourselves now, before the FDA approves PRK. If we delay, there are others who will be only too happy to use our apathy and inertia as an opportunity to turn our patients into their profits. 70% of the patients who are candidates for PRK are seen by us. These are optometric, not ophthalmological patients. At least they are for the present. These patients are expecting us to provide them with objective information and advice about refractive surgery. How many patients have asked you about refractive surgery during the past year? They're expecting us to tell them whether it's right for them, and if it is, where they can have it done. This gives us a tremendous amount of influence and leverage. But that influence and leverage are going to diminish over time as direct-to-the-consumer advertising encourages patients to bypass us and go directly to ophthalmology for PRK, unless we develop a strategy to prevent it. We need a strategy that provides us with equity and profits as well as professional fees for managing PRK patients. And more importantly, a strategy that ensures that when PRK comes to town, our patients remain our patients. If we're going to survive the PRK revolution, we need to compete from a position of strength, and that means acting collectively rather than individually. And it means acting sooner rather than later. The February 1994 issue of Consumer Reports featured a detailed article on both radiokeratotomy and PRK. The September 6, 1994 issue of the Washington Post contained a similar article. The media is replete with invitations to the consumer to attend informational seminars designed to convert them into refractive surgery patients. This kind of publicity clearly raises the level of consumer awareness about refractive surgery. And after PRK gets approved, the advertising is going to get much more intense. Meanwhile, there are 60 million American myopes out there who are beginning to give this their serious attention. As they hear about friends and relatives who have had it done, they're going to get more serious about it. And you can be sure that the advertising is going to be designed to bring them to closure on the issue by making it very clear that in 30 seconds or less, a non-incisional, computerized laser procedure can give them 20/20 vision, and that they can get it by going directly to the ophthalmologist or the laser center and bypassing us. In fact, the ads will encourage the patient to bypass us by offering free screenings, coupons, discounts, and incentives for referring friends and relatives. Dr. Paul Klein, the editor of Vision Monday, stated in an editorial he wrote in March 1994 that ODs must now prepare for an assault by ophthalmology on what was once a secure area of practice, treatment of the emmetropic patient. This is a made-for-the-consumer technology, and it's going to be marketed as a life-changing experience. As though it's really not surprising that refractive surgery is becoming a household word and that patients are asking us about it almost every day. We started asking our patients about refractive surgery to find out exactly what they did know, how they obtained their knowledge, and based on that knowledge, how interested they were in having the procedure done and at what price. This is what we found out. 35% of the patients we questioned were aware of refractive surgery. 62% of the patients questioned were interested in learning more, and interestingly, the preferred way of learning more was not by means of attending a seminar, but by consultation with a doctor. I recently had a conversation with the director of marketing for New Vision Technology, a company that has been operating PRK centers in England for the past 2 years. He said that the most effective way to bring a patient to closure on PRK was by having the patient spend about a half an hour one-on-one with a clinically knowledgeable marketing person. We've got to be providing our patients with reliable information about refractive surgery. If we don't, their opinions are going to be formed by advertisements and possibly by other eye care providers. And so going back to our survey, 21% of the patients we questioned said they were very interested in having the procedure done. We also found out that in 1994, at one of the largest RK centers in Baltimore, 1 out of 6, or 16% of the patients who were interested enough to attend a seminar were converted into a refractive surgical case. If you take 1/6 of our 16%, if you take 1/6 or 16% of our 21% who said they were very interested in having refractive surgery, you get 3.5%. In other words, our market research suggests that 3.5% of our practice will elect to have PRK. If you do 1,000 exams a year, 3.5% is 35 patients. If the price is $3,000 per bilateral procedure, this translates into $100,000 of PRK revenue for every 1,000 patients you examine. And these are not unrealistic numbers when you consider the marketing data that was compiled by Arthur D. Little, the consultant hired by Summit Technology, the leading principal manufacturer of the excimer. Let's talk a little bit about the chronology of FDA approval for PRK. On March 21st, 1994, the Ophthalmic Device Advisory Panel, which is the advisory body to the FDA, recommended that the two principal manufacturers of the excimer, Summit Technology and Vizx, be granted conditional approval to market the excimer as a treatment for pterygia, corneal dystrophies, band keratopathy, and for conditions for which penetrating keratoplasty is the only treatment alternative. This treatment is referred to as PTK, or phototherapeutic keratectomy. On March 13, 1995, Summit announced that they had received final PTK approval. This is a very important benchmark because now, for the first time, excimer lasers can be sold in the United States. And more importantly, it is now legal to market excimer technology directly to the consumer, albeit for therapeutic, not refractive use. On October 20th, 1994, the Ophthalmic Device Advisory Panel granted conditional approval for PRK to Summit Technology. And as of January 31st, 1995, Summit had submitted all of the additional data required by the FDA at the October 20th meeting. Based on these developments, it seems very likely that PRK will be given final approval by the end of 1995 or early 1996. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the demographics of refractive care in the United States. There are 140 million emmetropes in the United States. 90% of them wear glasses, 10% of them wear contact lenses, and less than 1% undergo refractive surgery at present. Historically, the treatment of refractive disorders has been almost an afterthought by ophthalmology. But with the improvement of incisional procedures such as RK and the introduction of innovative technologies such as PRK, what was once an afterthought is now becoming a new ophthalmologic subspecialty. And a fundamental shift is now taking place in the delivery of refractive eye care. In 1987, there were 30,000 RK procedures performed in the United States. With the recent improvements in RK instrumentation, that number grew geometrically to 200,000 in 1992, 300,000 in 1993. That represents a tenfold or 1,000% increase. And in 1994, there were even more. To date, over 1 million RK procedures have been performed worldwide. But this will pale in comparison to the number of PRK procedures that are expected to be performed. Irving Ahrens, the former consultant for Arthur D. Little, who did the PRK marketing research for Summit Technology, estimated that by the year 2000, between 2.4 and 3.5 million bilateral PRK procedures are going to be performed annually in the United States, or 2 to 3% of the myopic population. These estimates are based on the treatment of only a limited patient population, 21 to 55 years of age, between 1.5 and 6 diopters of nearsightedness. And when PRK is approved for the higher myopias, for astigmatism and for hyperopia, the market will be even bigger. More aggressive estimates have projected that the number of myopes that will elect to have PRK will be as high as 10%. At $1,500 per eye, this translates into a multi-billion-dollar industry that has the potential to become as big as the contact lens industry. When PRK becomes approved, there's going to be a pronounced shift away from RK. But more important to us is the shift in patient care demographics that will occur if we don't take steps to prevent it. Patients who were previously treated by optometrists will be obtaining surgical treatment alternatives that can reduce or even eliminate their dependence on glasses and contacts, and more importantly, increase their probability of choosing ophthalmologists for their primary follow-up care. And keep in mind that we're primarily talking about patients that optometry has traditionally taken care of, and their families and friends. I recently came across a quote in an investment article that read something like this: if PRK does what it is expected to do, glasses could go the way of wooden false teeth. Now, this may be an exaggeration, but it's not exaggerating to say that in a country where over 50% of all the eye care dollars are spent, which also happens to be the largest cosmetic surgery market in the world, there is a huge latent demand for PRK. And so, what is the best way for us to deal with this potentially burgeoning market and the threat it poses to our patient base? Well, a good place to start is by learning as much as we can about the major players in the marketplace and their strategic objectives. As FDA approval for PRK comes closer, we can see this marketplace crystallizing before our eyes. We've got three groups: the laser manufacturers, the ophthalmologists, and what I will refer to as the entrepreneurial laser groups. They each have their own PRK agenda, they each want the largest slice of the PRK pie, and they're all posturing themselves in anticipation of the millions of excimer dollars that are soon going to be spent. It's important for us to understand the mindset of each of these groups so that we can appreciate the impact of their marketplace activity on the practice of optometry, and so that we can develop our own market strategy. A strategy which, to reiterate, will provide us with more than just nominal compensation, and more importantly, will offer protection for our patient base. And so let's briefly take a look at each of these three groups. First, the manufacturers. In 1992, the two principal manufacturers of the excimer laser, Summit Technology and Vizx, which is a subsidiary of Alcon, consorted to create a third entity known as Pillar Point Partners. The purpose of this partnership is to collect a $250 fee to be divided between Summit and Vizx for every PRK procedure performed in the United States, regardless of whether it's done using a Vizx or a Summit excimer. Since the $250 Pillar Point fee comes right off the top of the retail price for PRK, Summit and Vizx are guaranteed the same profit even if there's price erosion, which there is likely to be. And both companies are able to profit from the use of the other's equipment. This is not a particularly healthy situation in the early phase of the PRK market, when Summit and Vizx are likely to be the only FDA-approved manufacturers, because it doesn't encourage competition. Second item. In 1993, Summit Technology formed a subsidiary called New Image Laser Centers, which is going to operate company-controlled retail PRK outlets. In other words, as a retailer of PRK, Summit is going to compete with the same customers it sells excimer lasers to as a manufacturer. Don't be surprised if Summit uses these facilities to manipulate the market price for PRK downward, because the lower the price, the more affordable the procedure becomes. And the more affordable the procedure becomes, the more patients will elect to have it done. And of course, the more procedures that are done, the greater the Pillar Point profits, which, as we've already seen, are immune to price erosion because they come right off of the top. And finally, Summit is well aware that 70% of the patients who are candidates for PRK are optometric patients. And so consequently, they're implementing a program to educate optometrists, at the expense of the optometrist, to become PRK referral sources. By increasing referrals from us to ophthalmologists, Summit has created yet another mechanism to maximize the total number of PRK procedures performed, and thus the pillar point profits. The second group of marketplace players are the ophthalmologists. And so we'd like to take a look at PRK from their perspective for a moment. In 1988, the Harvard School of Public Health published the results of a study which found that certain medical specialties, such as family practice and internal medicine, were undercompensated relative to the complexity of the duties they perform, while others, such as ophthalmology, were substantially overcompensated. As a result of this study, Medicare reimbursements for cataract surgery have been reduced by 40 to 50% over the past 6 years, so that an ophthalmologist who received $1,700 in 1988 for an extracapsular cataract excision receives only $900 to $1,000 for the same procedure in 1995. Secondly, we've got TPA states falling like dominoes, Maryland being the latest domino to fall. Consequently, revenues that went once solely to ophthalmology are now being shared with optometry. And finally, no matter which version of national health insurance ultimately gets passed, and no matter what managed care structures are in place, ophthalmologists stand to earn less than they have in the past. And so for all of these reasons, ophthalmologists have a tremendous motivation to find ways to expand their incomes. PRK represents a tremendous opportunity for ophthalmology to recoup some of their recent losses. The February 15, 1994 issue of the Review of Optometry stated that PRK could become the most lucrative procedure in ophthalmology. And like the manufacturers, ophthalmology is also aware that optometrists are the gatekeepers for 70% of the PRK patients. They know that in order for them to be able to capitalize on this opportunity, there's got to be a shift in patient demographics. The older, more pathological, ophthalmological patient base isn't going to be able to support a PRK business any more easily than it's supporting an RK business right now. The patients have to come from the practices of ODs. Each RK patient now requires several hundred dollars in marketing costs. And when PRK becomes approved, these marketing costs aren't going to go away, but they can be significantly mitigated by an optometric referral network. And that is why, at the local level, ophthalmologists are now attempting to establish co-management relationships with us. We're being solicited by ophthalmologists we haven't seen or heard from in years. Since the first of the year, we've been interviewing ophthalmologists to provide PRK for the Insight Network. Not surprisingly, the level of interest is extremely high, to the point where we're receiving calls from ophthalmologists every week, including hospital-based groups. Before the TPA bill was passed, some of them were even willing to trade therapeutic prescribing privileges for refractive surgery patients. All of this validates our thesis that optometry is temporarily in the driver's seat. But we can only remain there if we play our cards right. And that means, among other things, being careful about who we establish co-management relationships with, including this next group, the entrepreneurial laser companies. In December 1993, many of us were approached by a coterie of entrepreneurs to join a PRK referral co-management network. The entrepreneurs offered to provide management and marketing services for the network in exchange for the lion's share of the PRK profits, leaving optometry with a nominal co-management fee. Since then, we have been solicited by at least 3 other groups. In each case, what has been presented as optometric direction of the group has turned out to be optometric veneer superimposed upon ophthalmological and/or corporate control. And so before making a commitment to an entrepreneurially owned PRK network, we should be asking ourselves 4 poignant questions. First, beyond the co-management fee, does the compensation structure of the PRK network assign a fair value to the optometric patients that are being referred? Or to phrase it a little differently, aren't the patients which we are providing and who are the source of revenue in a PRK business worth more than the marketing and management services? Experience in other countries suggests that the optometric patients are worth more, a lot more. The reason PRK providers are not successful elsewhere in the world is not because they lack marketing and management, but because they lack a viable patient base. A viable patient base is precisely what we have to offer. If we underestimate the value of our patient base, we're making a big mistake. Second question. Are decisions made on the basis of a short-term exit strategy, one in which the entrepreneurs have sold off their equity within 5 to 7 years, compatible with the long-term personal commitments PRK patients have made and the long-term professional commitments we have made as practitioners? The answer to this should be a resounding no. 5 to 7 years from now, the entrepreneurs will have sold off their interest in the PRK business and moved on to another business venture, and we'll be left with the consequences of decisions that were made primarily on the basis of what's profitable in the short term, not the long term, which is what we're committed to and what our patients are committed to. Is this really what we want for ourselves and for our patients? And thirdly, are there alternative ways to structure a PRK business in which the optometric compensation is commensurate with not just the co-management services rendered, but also the value of the optometric patient base? The answer is yes, and I'll elaborate on how in a minute. And fourthly, would the profession of optometry be better served if optometrists rather than the entrepreneurs were the owners in the PRK network and simply purchased marketing and management services as expenses of doing business? Ron Herskowitz, the Vice President of Professional Development for Summit Technology, spoke at a dinner I attended in May of 1994 when the topic of entrepreneurial laser companies came up. His response was, "Do you want to know who your real enemies are? Your real enemies are the entrepreneurs with the get-in-quick, get-out-quick exit strategies." The entrepreneurs want us to believe that the most important variable in the PRK equation is the management team and the marketing plan, when in fact, it is the patient base. And so I'll say it again, to underestimate the intrinsic value of our collective optometric patient base is a big mistake. And I emphasize the word collective because we have tremendous power in this marketplace by using our collective patient base as a bargaining chip. We're finding this out every day as we talk to ophthalmologists and people in the PRK industry. On the other hand, if we fail to act collectively and simply make individual decisions about how we will interface with PRK, we have no bargaining power. The July 14th issue of the Washington Post contained an article which you'll receive in the packet we're going to distribute, documenting how physicians in the D.C. area are forming cooperative groups to protect themselves from marketplace forces. Physicians all over the country are doing this. We need to do the same thing. We believe that the best position for optometry is one of ownership and solidarity for the following three reasons. First, refractive care is the domain of optometry. It's optometry's specialty, if you will. Because we're experts in the area of refractive eye care, it's logical and appropriate that we should assume a position of ownership. Secondly, as we've repeatedly stated, and at the risk of sounding redundant, the optometric patient base is worth more than just a co-management fee and a perfunctory equity position. As caregivers for 70% of the patient population who are candidates for PRK, we will have a significant influence on patient decisions concerning whether and where they have this procedure done. In the early phase of this market, before mass advertising obtains a foothold, the manufacturers know it, the ophthalmologists know it, the entrepreneurs know it, and we should know it and utilize it to cut the best deal we can for optometry. In order to cut the best deal, it's imperative that we negotiate as a group rather than as individuals and obtain a fair market value for the optometric patient base. Ownership and solidarity enable us to do just that. And thirdly, we need to be in a position to control our own destiny. This is a lesson we should have learned on the DPA and TPA battlefields, but it's even more applicable to PRK because PRK refractive patients comprise a far greater percentage of our practices than pathology ever will. Richard Edlow estimated that the lifetime value of an optometric patient is about $136,000, taking into account referrals of family and friends. If we lose these patients and their families to ophthalmology and big business, the loss will be a substantial one. Ownership and solidarity provide us with an excellent insurance policy against this type of patient erosion. It gives us more control over our destiny. We have developed a model for the delivery of PRK in which optometry will retain its role as the refractive specialty, in which compensation for optometrists will be on the basis of the fair market value of the services rendered plus the value of the patient base, and in which optometry will have the decision-making power in the organization. In this model, management, marketing, and ophthalmology will be fairly but not disproportionately compensated for the services that they contribute. And unlike other models, ours will take into consideration the huge amounts of time, energy, and money all of us have invested in our practices. Let me preface this section by reiterating that this meeting is about more than just money. It's about where our patients will go for refractive eye care in 5 years. It's about the future position of optometry in the eye care chain if the ophthalmologists and the entrepreneurs control the flow of PRK patients. And it's about the fact that in terms of the business of PRK, we can get a much better deal for ourselves through ownership and by negotiating it as a group than we can as individuals. Which brings us to the subject of economics. In order to appreciate this model, we need to briefly look at some numbers. If you determine that PRK is the appropriate refractive treatment for 12 of your patients in a year, or 1 patient a month, and if for this illustration we assume a bilateral PRK price of $3,000, you will generate $36,000 in PRK revenue during that year. If 75 ODs do the same thing, the total PRK revenue generated would be $2,700,000. Now, from this amount of revenue, the following costs and expenses will need to be subtracted. First, the pillar point fee of $250 per procedure or $500 per bilateral case, and that adds up to $450,000. Secondly, a co-management fee for yourself of $500 per case, which for 12 bilateral cases comes to $6,000. Again, for 75 ODs, that would be $450,000 also for the entire network. And third, an ophthalmological fee of $500 per case or $450,000. And that's for less than 2 days' work. Actually, for this illustration, it works out to less than 1 day per week. Each procedure takes less than 15 minutes of ophthalmological time, and 20 procedures could easily be scheduled in 1 day. Fourthly, we need to subtract business expenses, which we have conservatively estimated at $730,000. This would cover items such as marketing and management costs, personnel costs, the cost of setting up the necessary management information systems, as well as other business and administrative expenses, and the cost of leasing an excimer laser. These numbers take into account the Performa data developed for Summit Technology by Arthur D. Little, as well as an analysis that was done by Smith Barney. But we deliberately made them more conservative in order to avoid overstating the profitability, which is $732,000. If you have 18 patients, or 3 every 2 months, the net profit increases to $1,294,520. And if you have 36 patients, or 3 per month, the profit is $2,592,000. And for 48 patients, or 1 patient per week, the profit is $3,456,000. These are conservative and realistic illustrations. But even if the price erodes, we can still make money because by already having these patients in our practice, we won't incur the tremendous advertising costs that the ophthalmologists and the entrepreneurs will incur. And by the way, in this model, we only need to have 6 PRK patients per year per OD, or about 1 patient every other month, to break even. With a network of 75 ODs, this represents a minimal risk. By the way, we already have 50. Once you crunch these numbers, it's easy to appreciate why, months before PRK is even approved, so much effort is being devoted by the manufacturers, the ophthalmologists, and the entrepreneurs to organizing optometrically based PRK networks. Without that patient base, which for the moment is under the aegis of optometry, those windfall profits that are being projected will be much more difficult to attain.
Please turn the tape over.
In July 1994, we formed Insight as a limited liability company. Insight is composed of owner optometrists, co-managing optometrists, ophthalmologists who are employed by optometrists as independent contractors, and a minority of non-clinician owners. Insight will provide a profitable and ethical framework for optometrists to offer PRK and related services to patients who are interested and medically qualified. Prospective patients will be seen initially by an optometrist who will determine if the patient is a good candidate for PRK. The optometrist will provide counseling concerning the safety and efficacy of this procedure, as well as a full disclosure of any ownership in Insight. Patients electing to have the procedure done will pay a global fee for PRK and related services. Most of the preoperative testing and postoperative care will be done by the optometrist. The surgery will be performed at the office of an ophthalmologist who is subcontracted to the optometrists in the Insight network. Co-management fees will be distributed by Insight to ODs on the basis of their clinical participation in the business. Profits will be distributed on the basis of percentage ownership. Insight will be operated by a management team which will be accountable to its executive board. The executive board is composed of 7 Insight owners, 6 of whom are ODs, all elected by Insight owners. Insight will purchase the necessary management and marketing services for the network, and Insight will have tremendous bargaining power when it comes to choosing ophthalmologists to perform PRK for us and when it comes to determining how much they will be paid for this service, because we will be negotiating as a group rather than as individuals, and because we've got the essential ingredient in the PRK equation, the patients. We are convinced that the best way for optometry to interface with PRK is through the optometric ownership model we have just described. We've spent thousands of dollars over the past year obtaining the necessary legal counsel to guide the formation of this model. We are committed to its implementation over the succeeding months, and we invite you to join us. This slide is entitled, Turning Over versus Taking Over the Future. And frankly, that's what it comes down to. PRK is creating a critical moment for optometry. It represents an unprecedented change in the delivery of vision care. But for once in the history of this profession, we hold the trump card. If we play it wisely, optometry will be well positioned as a significant and sustainable presence in this market. If we squander it, we could find ourselves in a compromised position in the eye care chain in the years ahead. It's been estimated that there's a lag time of between 1 and 2 years before a patient makes a decision to undergo refractive surgery. This is where optometry has a tremendous advantage. That coveted 70% patient base is looking to us for objective information about refractive surgery. We can begin counseling them tomorrow to help them make informed choices about PRK and other refractive treatment options. And we can do it without incurring the marketing costs that the manufacturers, the ophthalmologists, and the entrepreneurs are now incurring and will continue to incur. In fact, we can actually benefit from the marketing dollars they spend if we properly communicate with our patients. If we do, the next few months will serve as the lag period. And when PRK becomes approved at the end of this year or early next year, the patient decisions will already have been made in many cases. And our patients will know that the PRK care they receive from us will be of the same high quality as the non-surgical refractive care they've received from us in the past. That we already have these patients in our practices represents a tremendous advantage in an incipient market. All we need to do is educate a patient base that already exists, while the manufacturers, the ophthalmologists, and the entrepreneurs have to spend millions of dollars advertising for new patients. But our advantage is only going to last for a brief window of time. The other players, as we have seen, are keenly aware of our strength, and they're already manipulating it to their own ends. If optometry doesn't act wisely and expeditiously to utilize the leverage we now have and establish a strong market presence for ourselves, if we wait until the entrepreneurs come in, and as they're already beginning to do, if we wait until mass advertising gets a foothold, which it is already beginning to do, we could find ourselves in a compromised position in the years ahead. One of my personal motivations for becoming involved in this project is that I don't want what's happened to the profession of pharmacy to happen to optometry. I practiced pharmacy for 7 years prior to going to optometry school. I still have a license, which I occasionally use. And I've seen what can happen to a profession that has lost control of its destiny. Pharmacy has become a profession that now has its remuneration and its professional prerogatives determined by non-pharmacists. Optometry deserves better. Last summer, I was able to spend 2 full days seeing PRK patients. One day at Summit's New Image Laser Center in London, and one at their center in Edinburgh, Scotland. 80% of these patients are getting 20/20 visual results. They are free from any discomfort after the first few days following the procedure, and they're anxious to have the fellow eye done. I came back more convinced than ever that PRK is going to make a major impact in the United States next year when it's approved. And I have the clinical outcome data from the Royal College of Surgeons, which is also included in the packet you will receive. We founded Insight because we know optometric ownership is the best way to go. It will work for us because we can build a successful organization around the values we all share as optometrists. And we invite you to join us in the formation of this company. This is how you can do it. Ownership involves profit sharing. Ownership is a great catalyst to growth, as we all know from personal experience in our practices. And ownership involves investment. It involves the investment of time, energy, and money. At this point, we have invested significant amounts of all three. In order for this model to be ready to roll on the first day PRK is approved, Insight will orchestrate the following events. On June 11, 1995, the Insight Clinical Committee, in conjunction with PCO and Dr. Rashish Rajpal, one of the principal PRK investigators at Georgetown University, will offer a 7-hour transcript quality course with a future wet lab entitled The Clinical Management of the PRK Patient. Tuition will be free for Insight owners. Second, Insight will establish an information highway that will enable us to collect and analyze clinical, financial, and marketing data relative to PRK from every practice in the network. Third, the Insight Marketing Committee will provide a comprehensive marketing program that will assist you in educating your staff and your patients about PRK. Fourth, Insight is in the process of registering as a security in the state of Maryland and is preparing the necessary contracts and legal documents for the network. And fifth, Insight will, if necessary, procure an excimer laser. We are currently pursuing several avenues to this end, and I'm not at liberty to share the details yet, but suffice it to say that because of the strength of our patient base, Insight will probably be able to control an excimer laser without having to assume the capital risk of purchasing one. At this point, the founders and co-founders of Insight have invested $180,000 toward the startup cost of the company. A $6,000 investment on your part will be repaid after you have co-managed only 12 patients, or only 1 patient per month, at $500 per patient co-management fee. But beyond the co-management fees, in terms of return on investment, we're going to be able to survive the coming PRK shakeout, and there's going to be a shakeout. We're going to be able to survive it because of our patient base, because of our greatly reduced marketing costs, and because we've got top professional management. And we're going to end up with a net-to-gross ratio in the 20 to 30% range, which is as good or better than you can expect from most growth stocks. Keep in mind that the break-even point for this model is only 6 patients per year per OD. I think everyone in this room has 6 patients in their practice who are interested and qualified for PRK. When you look at it this way, it's very doable. The risk is minimal. The protection that Insight will provide against the erosion of your patients and the referrals that they would generate is worth much more than $6,000. This is really an investment in ourselves. And so again, please consider this a personal invitation to join us as we roll out this company. If you would like to invest less than $6,000, you may purchase ownership in $1,000 increments and earn profits in proportion to your percentage ownership. If you're only interested in earning the co-management fee and not the profits, you may join Insight as a co-managing participant. But if you've caught the vision tonight and want to obtain the highest levels of return by being an owner in a company which has the best interests of optometry as its raison d'etre, we invite you to join us as an Insight owner. The packet you will receive contains additional information about Insight, including a document which you can use to indicate your interest in joining us. Thank you for your attention.